Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of the revamped Blender Absolute Beginner tutorial. Kind of a long title. Sorry, it took me a second to remember everything. So here's what we're going to do today. Today we're going to talk about what it means to render a picture and what it is, or some of the settings involved in doing so. So I know some of you guys are out there trying to learn so that you can model art and make animations or pictures. Well, the process of rendering, what I mean when I say render, I mean turning what you model, the mesh, the box, whatever object you're modeling with all of these faces and vertices and lines, turning that into a picture or a movie, something that brings everything together, all the materials, the lighting, puts it all into a nice picture. And really that's all it means to render, is just to make a picture out of it. Uh, just so you know, rendering, when you render the picture, it's all about light. I mentioned before we have this lamp, this light source. There's several different kinds of light sources, and depending on which render engine you use, whether it be Blender Render or Cycles Render, those are the two pretty common ones, with Cycles being newer and catching on a lot more. There's a lot of different types of light sources that you can use to illuminate your scene. And keep in mind, just like in the real world, without light, you won't see anything. And depending on how you position the light, it can really bring your scene to life, or it can kind of mess up everything in your scene. And you'll kind of see what we're talking about as we go through this. But keep in mind, when we render it, we're talking mostly just about what's on the faces of the object and how the light bounces off of them. And all those calculations make your picture. So first, we want to set up a good scene to play with as we're rendering this. We're going to do something really simple, but much more interesting than a simple cube. First of all, let's select the cube. Remember, that's right mouse button. I hit X, bring up the delete menu, and click delete. Then you want to add in something. I'm going to hit Shift A for the shortcut menu to add in. If you don't want to do Shift A, if you're not comfortable with keyboard shortcuts, you can come over to the Create tab. And remember, this is toggled on and off with T. And then you can click Plane. But I'm just going to Shift A, Mesh, Plane. Now it's small. We want to scale it up. If you want to see the exact dimensions, it's over on the right. Remember, this menu is the N menu. It is 2 by 2 and 0 in the Z direction. And you can see that on the squares if you look close. It's 2 squares by 2 squares. We want to scale it probably times 5, so I'm going to hit S to scale, and I'm just going to hit the number 5. And that'll scale it 5 times exactly. Hit Enter to accept. And then you are good to go with that. Now we have something, we have like a platter, I guess, if you want to say, a base, and now we're going to put something on top. The most interesting pre-made shape, I think, is going to be the monkey head that is the mascot of Blender, and it's named Suzanne. So if you do Shift A, Mesh, it's actually monkey under here, but the name is Suzanne. You can see in the white text there it says construct a Suzanne mesh. So let's insert a monkey. We're going to have to raise him up. Remember, it's G to grab, and you're going to hit Z to lock him on the X-axis. So that's G and then Z. And then you're going to raise him up just above there so we can have some shadows, that kind of thing. You want enough room there to cast a shadow. And then if you notice, the camera's kind of in the corner, so I want to rotate him to face the corner. I'm going to hit R for rotate, and I'm going to hit Z again to lock the rotation just along the Z axis. And if you're ever unsure which axis to rotate along, you can just test them out. You can switch between them on the fly. So I hit Z, or you can hit X, or you can hit Y. Obviously those aren't what we want, so you can go back to Z, and then you can just left click to accept when you get the rotation you want. Okay, so there's our scene. We have a floating monkey head above a plane. You know, it's much more interesting than a cube, but it took little effort. Now, one other thing I want to talk about, let me show you what I want to talk about. Let's go to Tools on the left-hand menu. there's this option down here called shading, and you can either shade smooth or shade flat. And I will demonstrate for you what the difference is. So I hit N to get rid of that menu just to clear up some room. There's a shortcut button to just do a really quick preview of a render. It's not a full quality render, but it's a real quick preview so you can make sure you got the camera in the right position or that kind of stuff. And the shortcut for that is F12. So if you hit F12, oh, it looks like I'm still in cycles render. So yours may look a little different than this. I'm going to hit escape to go back. And I'm actually going to start out with Blender render. We may get to a little bit of cycles render, but I'm going to hit F12, and if it doesn't work, make sure your mouse is in the 3D view window and hit F12 to do a really quick render. And so that's what our picture looks like. We have the camera facing the monkey. You have a light source somewhere off to the right, you can tell because of the shadows being cast to the left. And you'll notice all of the faces on the monkey are pretty visible. I could point out every single face pretty much just because it's very jagged and stuff like that. Well, let me hit escape to go back. That is the flat shading. So if I wanted to have it automatically smooth out all of the shading or all of the faces, you can click smooth. And you can actually even see it in the preview. It automatically just smooths and combines things together. So if I hit F12 again, you got a little bit better looking monkey, a little more smooth, still a little pixelated, or not pixelated, but still a little rough, but much better. So I'm going to stick with this as our scene and talk about a few render options. So I hit escape again to get rid of that. To set the render options and not just do a quick preview, you can go over to the properties window. If you remember, it starts just under this outline window, has these little tabs, and then it goes all the way down to the bottom. Now, the render options are the camera tab, the tab that has the camera picture on it. And just for simplicity's sake, I want to have you guys just go ahead and collapse all of these menus. Any of these little arrows, just collapse them. And you can see really simply the different options you have for rendering. Most of these you will not use until you get into much more advanced modeling. Most of this is really useless at this point because we don't have what we need to use some of this stuff. And that's not a bad thing. It's just there for extra options in case you need it, and we don't. So let's start with the menus one at a time. We have this render, and this is just really the button. The button to click, I want to render a picture, I want to render an animation, which is going to be a video, or render an audio. You can do some audio mixing, I believe. I haven't really done it in Blender, but it's very full featured. Okay, so if I just clicked render, it would bring me to what looks like the same as the preview. And that's because most of my preview options are set the same as the full render options. They don't have to be. And you can see up in this corner it tells you all of the what does it say? All of the details about the render. It took less than a second to render this many vertices, this many faces, yeah, the memory it used up, that kind of stuff. So that's the render tab. Now we have dimensions. This is where you set the size of your render. Now most of the time you can just click on a preset, or if you want you can set the resolution. My monitor resolution is 1920 by 1080, so that would be a good resolution, say if I wanted to make a background or something like that. And then you have this percentage under here. Now this percentage by default is set at 50%, and I don't know why, but basically it's a quick and simple way to scale the resolution if you don't want to mess with the numbers and dividing and multiplying. You can just set a percentage of that. Most of the time you're going to want 100% since you set 1920 by 1080. If I went to 50%, it would be half of the resolution in each dimension. It's just a quick and easy way, but 100% will do the full resolution. You can set the aspect ratio, but this isn't what it sounds like as far as if I want widescreen. I have a widescreen monitor, it's 16:9 aspect ratio, but that's already set by the resolution. As you notice, this picture is longer than it is tall. It's already set there. If I change the aspect ratio, it just stretches it out even further. So you have non-square pixels, essentially. Let me show you an example. If I wanted to stretch out the Y dimension by 2, and then I re-render everything, it just stretches it out by 2. Not desirable in most cases. So I'm going to set it back to 1, re-render that. Now I'm also at 100%, so it's going to be a bigger picture. You can zoom in and out with the scroll wheel. By the way, the 3D view window changed to the what's it called? Image editor. So it's just a different window to view images. If you want to set it back at any time, I think you can just hit escape, or you can come down to the header and change it back to the 3D view window manually. Okay, so back to the options. The frame range, this is all stuff from if you want to do a movie. So you can set the start frame, end frame, how many frames to step if you want it to be a faster or slower animation, the main frame rate of the video, that kind of stuff. We're not going to work with that at the moment because we don't have any animation or haven't even touched on how to do an animation yet. So dimensions is easy. You set the dimensions. You can use a preset if you want. That's pretty easy stuff. Okay, anti-aliasing. This is necessary always, but it does use a lot of memory. So what it does, if you guys aren't familiar, there's actually a really good Wikipedia article on it. But what it does is it basically smooths out lines on areas that are high contrast. So what you'll see, for example, is on this plane I have a black shadow and a light gray plane, and the lines between those, if they're jagged, sometimes you'll get these like really jagged lines if you zoom in. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if I turn off anti-aliasing and I want to re-render this, see these jagged lines? You can see how jagged they are, but if you turn it back on, ramp it up to 16, re-render, see how it kind of fades them together better, so that when you're zoomed out it doesn't look as jagged, it looks a lot nicer. So anti-aliasing is a must, but like I said, it does use up a lot of memory, so be careful with going overboard there. Sample motion blur is an effect you can use with animations to create a motion blur. Again, we're not going to use that. Shading, you can turn on and off certain things if you want to selectively render only certain things. Once you have textures and shadows, so look, if I turn off shadows and I render, surprise, there's no shadows. It's just a quick and easy menu to access a couple of options. We don't have any textures at the moment, or most of this stuff, to be honest, so it doesn't matter if we turn on or off. Ray tracing is the calculations of how the light bounces. It's almost always something you want, so we'll do that. Alright, that's shading. Performance, you can set the number of threads on your processor for rendering. Rendering is actually a parallelizable process, meaning you can run it on multiple threads simultaneously, do different parts. Just have auto detect most of the time. You can have other options with memory management. For the most part, you won't really need to fix any of this. Performance is only if you are doing some really high-end stuff. Post-processing, again, we're not going to work with any of this at the moment. We're going to work on mostly just doing it from the model. Post-processing would be to set up, after you have the render, to set up different ways to affect that. I know that was really vague, but it's not something we need to worry about. Nor is freestyle, nor is, well, we could worry about stamp. Freestyle is kind of, I think, just drawing lines and rendering lines that you draw on there. Stamp, you can actually add a kind of a watermark, or just like a name or a date or something to the render. So if I wanted to add, let's say this is mine, I would type it in down here, render, and it'll say up here the watermark of the file, all this stuff. It'll add all the details onto the, oh, I didn't check the number. So yeah, it'll add all the details to the picture as part of the picture. This is mine. That's useful sometimes if you want to keep track of different frames. Yeah, not useful for us at the moment. Output, this is where you'll set where you want to save it. This is where you'll set the file type. You probably do want to overwrite unless you're doing multiple scenes. File extensions, you'll want, unless, yeah. So basically don't put the file extension in the file path, and then it'll automatically put the file extension on, like PNG. If you want to change the file format, be aware that different file formats have different options. For example, PNG can support black and white, RGB, which is full color, RGBA, which the alpha channel is used for transparency, and color depth and compression. Those are all specific to PNG. If you switch, for example, to JPEG, you don't have the option to have an alpha channel because JPEG doesn't support transparency. And yeah, so PNG is a really good file type for this kind of stuff. It maintains a good quality while having a reasonable file size. And then that's where you'll set everything to save your file, save your picture, and then you can access it outside of Blender if you want. And then bake is something we won't use probably. Bake is something if you want to make like a texture of some kind out of the shadows. So for example, in a computer game, it's very costly to calculate shadows all the time. So what I could do is bake how the shadows would look and then use it as a texture and apply it back so that in the next time I render it, it doesn't have to calculate the shadows. It just uses a special texture to fake the shadows, I guess. Baking is like a pre-rendered shortcut kind of thing. So don't worry about that, at least not at this point in time. The main ones are dimensions, make sure anti-aliasing is checked, output, and that's really all you need to worry about. Setting the size and the type. So that's how to render, guys. Now you should be able to, whatever we do or whatever we make in Blender in the coming tutorials, you should be able to save it as a file type that you can use elsewhere. You can make your own backgrounds, you can do whatever you want. You can share these on your favorite social networking sites, share them with your friends, whatever. So now I just want to go over a couple other options, just really brief. This is not going to be in depth at all. I just want to introduce you to these options and go from there. So the camera is the render options, and that's the same no matter which object I have selected. Then we have what are called, oh, these are the layers. You can render which layers you want. Notice this looks a lot like the layer select down here. You can selectively render certain layers or certain things, yeah. Don't worry about that unless you have a really complex scene and you want to just render parts of it and certain things. The next one we have is the scene, and this sets some of the general global options for the scene. Usually we don't need to touch these options at all. Next ones are the interesting ones. You have the world. You can turn on some important properties here, but again, we won't use this one too much. A lot of this has to do with lighting and just general look of the scene. Then we get into some of the materials. This is the objects, how to manage objects. Materials is over here. Okay. So some of the important ones here are you're going to have this wrench. The wrench is modifiers. There's a cool modifier. If I go back to flat shading on here. An example of a modifier is I could go to subdivision surface, and if you add the subdivision surface and then you come in here, notice already it actually split. If I go to views 0, that would be the original. As I go views up, it will subdivide all of those to smooth it out, and I can do the same thing that the smooth shading did, but this actually will give me more vertices and faces. So this can actually get pretty costly as far as performance goes, because you can have a lot of vertex and faces to keep track of. So you set the number you view, you can set the number that actually render, and we'll use this a lot. This is a really easy way to smooth out things once you get the general shape. And you can see that's, I'm gonna go ahead and render that. You can see it's a lot more smooth, and that's not even on smooth shading. If we turn to smooth shading, hit F12 to do that quickie render, it looks a lot smoother just with that simple modifier. So that's what modifiers do. There's a lot of modifiers, and you can close them with X. Okay, so the next one that's important is the circle. Circle is for materials. How do I scroll this over? Okay, you can use the scroll wheel on here to scroll over. Circles for material, texture. Wait, yeah, materials. Materials and textures are kind of weird. With Blender Render, material is kind of like what it's made out of. You have some of the lighting options with the material, how if it's shiny, if it's flat, that kind of thing. And then textures is kind of like the wallpaper you apply to that, if it has polka dots or if it has stripes, that kind of thing. So that's a good way to think about it. Material is how the light interacts with it, if it only bounces off red light or if it shines really shiny, that kind of thing. And the texture is kind of like a wallpaper you then apply. And then you can also mess with particles. I never have, or physics is the last one, to do physics simulations, that kinds of things. So you have a lot of options over here. Like I said, I just want to introduce you to a couple of them so that when we go to them later in later tutorials, you're not totally taken by surprise. But the main purpose was to show off the render options. You should now be pretty comfortable with making a picture out of anything you model. And that's the point of the tutorial. Next week we'll get into we'll find a project and we'll start making something more complex and using some of the better options to help us along the way. So thanks for watching, guys. I will see you next week.